I woke up on the third morning at my daughter's cabin and couldn't remember if I'd locked the front door the night before. That sounds like nothing. A small thing. The kind of thing a man my age brushes off and laughs about over coffee. Except I'd been forgetting a lot of small things lately. My keys twice in 1 week. Whether I'd taken my blood pressure pill, the name of the street where my wife and I had lived for 22 years before she passed. The doctor said grief does that. Scrambles the short-term stuff. I was 68 years old, recently retired from 30 years in civil engineering, and I had just buried my wife with 34 years 4 months earlier. So yes, I was forgetting things. My daughter said that was exactly why she'd invited me to stay. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone in that house right now," she'd told me over the phone in January. "Come up to the cabin, breathe some mountain air. Nolan and I will take care of you." She sounded so warm when she said it. She always did. The cabin sat about 40 minutes outside Asheville, North Carolina, up a 2-lane road that wound through old hardwood forest. My daughter and her husband had bought it 2 years before my wife got sick. A fixer-upper they'd renovated into something genuinely beautiful. Exposed beams, a stone fireplace, a back porch that looked out over a ridge. I'd helped them with some of the structural work. I knew every corner of that place. Or I thought I did. I poured my coffee that third morning and stood at the kitchen window. The February light was thin and pale. I could see the tree line and, closer, the detached workshop my son-in-law used for his woodworking hobby. And I could see the man who lived in the small property next door, an older man, mid-70s at least, who I'd exchanged a wave or two with, but never properly met. He was standing at his fence line, looking directly at the cabin. Looking at me. I raised my mug. A polite gesture. He didn't wave back. He just held my gaze for a moment, then turned and walked back toward his house. Strange. I put it out of my mind. My daughter came downstairs around 9. She was 41, took after her mother in the cheekbones and the eyes, and had her mother's gift for making a room feel warmer just by entering it. She hugged me and asked how I'd slept and poured herself coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table like everything was perfectly ordinary. Her husband came down 20 minutes later. Nolan was 43, handsome in the way that real estate agents tend to be, with a firm handshake and an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. I had never entirely trusted him. My wife had liked him fine, but she was more charitable than me by nature. "Sleep okay, Walt?" he asked. He always called me Walt. I had never asked him to. "Well enough," I said. That afternoon, Nolan suggested I take a walk while he and my daughter ran into town for groceries. The air would do me good, he said. I agreed, mostly because I wanted some time without them watching me. I walked the perimeter of the property. At some point, I found myself near the fence line where I'd seen the neighbor that morning. He was there again, working on a gate latch, or pretending to. When he saw me, he straightened up slowly and looked at me the way a man looks when he's been waiting. "You're the father," he said. "I am," I said. His name was August. August Reardon. He'd lived on that property for 18 years, he told me. He said it carefully, like the number mattered. He had a square, weathered face and the kind of steady eyes that come from a life spent paying close attention. He asked me how long I was planning to stay. "A few weeks," I said. "Maybe a month." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Has anything felt off to you since you got here?" I almost laughed. I told him about my forgetting things, the fog I'd been living in since my wife died. I said I figured that was all it was. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me. "How much are you drinking up here?" he said. "1 glass of wine at night," I said. "My daughter insists. She says it helps me sleep." He looked at the cabin, then back at me. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you normally forget things like that before your wife passed?" I opened my mouth to say yes, and then I stopped, because the honest answer was no. The forgetting had started here. Not when Patricia died, not during the worst months of grief. Here, at this cabin, in the 3 days since I'd arrived. I didn't say anything. August said, "I retired from the DEA 11 years ago. 32 years on the job. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you so you understand that I know what I'm seeing." He paused. "Your son-in-law came by here 6 weeks ago and asked me some questions about the property line on the north side. We talked for about 20 minutes, and the whole time we talked, I was thinking, that man is building up to something. I just didn't know what." I stood there in the cold air and felt something shift in my chest. Not panic, something quieter and colder than panic. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying go carefully," he said, "and don't drink the wine tonight." I walked back to the cabin. My daughter called to say they were picking up dinner on the way home, a place in town I'd mentioned liking. She sounded warm. She always sounded warm. I sat in the living room and looked at the bookshelves and the stone fireplace and the renovation work I'd helped with, and I thought about my wife. Patricia, 34 years. She'd been the one who suggested we help them buy this cabin when they couldn't get the financing. She'd written them a check from our joint savings, $140,000. She'd insisted on it being a gift, not a loan. 6 weeks later, she'd started getting confused. The doctor said it was early onset dementia. She was 66 years old. No family history. I had asked questions and they had given me clinical answers and I had accepted them because what else does a man do? I sat in that living room and for the first time I let myself ask the question I had been refusing to ask for 8 months. What if it wasn't dementia? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room and stared at the ceiling and waited. Around midnight, I heard Nolan's footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Just passing by, probably. I lay still and listened to them stop, then move on. In the morning, I called my youngest son from the back porch while my daughter made breakfast. He lives in Phoenix, works in IT, calls me every Sunday. I told him I needed him to do something for me quietly. I needed him to call Patricia's primary care doctor, not the neurologist, the GP, Dr. Chiris, Harmon, and ask about the specific medications she'd been on in the months before her diagnosis. Every prescription and every dosage. I told him not to explain why. Just get the list. He was quiet for a long moment. "Dad," he said, "what's going on?" "I'll tell you when I know more," I said. "Please just do it." That same morning, while Nolan was in his workshop and my daughter was on a video call for her job, I went through the kitchen methodically. I was looking for nothing specific. I found it anyway. In the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one I needed a step stool to reach, the one my daughter knew I avoided because of my bad shoulder, there was a supplement bottle. It was labeled as magnesium. I took a photo of it with my phone. Then I put it back exactly as I'd found it. That afternoon, August was at his fence again. I walked over. I showed him the photo. He looked at it for a long time. "Magnesium doesn't look like that," he said. "Those capsules are the wrong color for a standard supplement." He handed my phone back. "I have a friend in Asheville, former colleague. He runs a private toxicology consulting firm now. If you can get me one of those capsules, I can have it tested." "How long?" I said. 3 days, maybe 2. I went back that evening and waited until both of them were absorbed in a movie. I climbed up to the cabinet and took one capsule. I put it in a plastic sandwich bag and walked it over to August's fence and left it in the place he'd described, under a flat rock near the gate post. Then I came back inside and sat on the couch with my daughter and watched the end of a movie I will never be able to name, and I held my hands very still in my lap. The next day was day 5. I had not taken any wine since my conversation with August. My daughter mentioned it once, casually. I should really try to sleep. The wine helped. And I told her my stomach had been bothering me. She accepted this without pressing. My son called that evening. He'd spoken with Dr. Harmon's office. The nurse had been hesitant but had confirmed on the record that in the months before Patricia's diagnosis, the doctor had noticed anomalies in her blood work that were inconsistent with dementia progression. Dr. Harmon had intended to order additional testing. Before he could, Patricia had been transferred to the specialist. The specialist had diagnosed dementia, and the previous doctor's concerns had never been followed up. I sat on the back porch in the cold and listened to my son tell me this, and said very little. After I hung up, I did not go back inside for a long time. I had met Patricia at a university mixer in 1988. She had been wearing a green dress and arguing with someone about the structural integrity of a bridge design, and I had fallen completely in love with her inside of 30 seconds. We had been together every year since. We had raised 3 children. We had built a life so ordinary and solid and good that I had sometimes forgotten to appreciate it. She had been healthy her entire life. She had eaten well and exercised and never missed a checkup. And then she had written $140,000 to help our daughter buy a mountain cabin. And 6 weeks later, she had started forgetting things. I went back inside and I watched my daughter pour herself a glass of wine and smile at something Nolan said. And I understood then, in a way that was very calm and very permanent, what I was dealing with. I called a lawyer the next morning, not a local one. A firm in Charlotte I'd used years before for an estate matter. A man named Dennis who was thorough and discreet. I told him I needed him to look at something urgently. I told him about the power of attorney. Because there was a power of attorney, I'd signed it 4 months after Patricia died, when I was deep in the worst of the grief, and my daughter had sat with me at the kitchen table and said that it was just a precaution, just in case something happened to me, just to make sure someone could handle things while I couldn't. She'd had the document prepared by a notary she knew. I hadn't read it carefully. Dennis called me back 6 hours later. His voice was very controlled. "Walt," he said, "this document gives your daughter and her husband joint authority over your financial accounts, your real property, and your healthcare decisions. The language is unusually broad. There's also a second document included in the filing, a draft transfer of your primary residence in Greenville to their names. It has your signature on it." I had never signed a property transfer. I told him I had no memory of signing anything like that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I told him. "I want you to leave that property," he said. "Today." I looked out the window at the workshop where Nolan was working, at the driveway where both their cars were parked. "Not yet," I said. "Give me 2 more days." I think he started to argue. I told him I needed to do something first. I told him to prepare whatever legal challenge he needed to prepare and to be ready to move on my call. He told me to be careful, and I told him I would. August got the test results on day 7. He came to the fence at 7 in the morning and waited until I came out under the pretense of checking my car. The report from his colleague was on his phone. He let me read it, standing there in the cold. The capsule contained a combination of compounds. One was a benzodiazepine derivative. One was something else. Something that, in consistent low doses over weeks or months, was associated with memory disruption, confusion, and in vulnerable patients, symptoms closely mimicking early cognitive decline. I read it twice. I handed his phone back. "My wife," I said. I couldn't finish the sentence. August said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." "Is this enough?" I said. "For what needs to happen next?" "Pair it with the financial documents," he said. "And yes, especially with an exhumation." I hadn't thought about an exhumation. I thought about it now. Standing in the gray February morning, and something broke open in my chest that I am not going to describe in detail because some things are private. I called my son in Phoenix and I told him everything. Then I called my middle child, my son in Maryland, and told him too. Then I called Dennis again. I had one more conversation to have. That evening after dinner, when Nolan was in the shower and my daughter was cleaning up the kitchen, I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. When she turned around and saw my face, something in hers changed. A small, almost imperceptible tightening. "Dad," she said. "Sit down," I said. She sat. I did not raise my voice. I am not a man who raises his voice. I laid out what I knew the way I used to present engineering assessments, clearly, in order, without drama. The capsules, the blood work, the power of attorney, the unsigned property transfer with my signature on it. She said nothing for most of it. When I finished, she looked at the table for a long moment. Then she said, "Dad, you don't understand the financial pressure we've been under." "Stop," I said. She stopped. "Your mother is buried in Greenville," I said, "and I need to know if what happened to her was natural. I need you to understand that that question is going to be answered. Whatever the answer is, it will be answered. I paused. The only thing you can control now is whether you cooperate. She started crying. I had seen her cry before, at her mother's funeral, at her wedding, when her children were born, and none of it looked like this. This was different. This was the crying of someone who has realized there is no more road in front of them. Nolan came downstairs 20 minutes later into a kitchen that felt like a different room than the one he'd left. He figured it out quickly. He was a smart man in that way. He looked at my daughter, then at me, then at the table between us. "Walt," he started. "Don't," I said. My son from Maryland arrived the next morning. He'd driven through the night. August met him at the door with me. Within 48 hours, Dennis had filed an emergency motion to invalidate the power of attorney and the property transfer. The Buncombe County Sheriff's Office made contact with Patricia's physicians. The DA's office in Greenville was notified. The legal process that followed took months. It was not neat or quick or satisfying in the way people imagine justice is. There were depositions and continuances and arguments about jurisdiction and a period of 3 weeks where I genuinely did not know how it would end. But I need to tell you something about that period, because it matters. My son flew in from Phoenix and stayed in a hotel in Asheville for most of it. My son from Maryland drove up twice. My 3 grandchildren called me every week. A friend from my engineering days, a man I hadn't seen in 7 years, drove over from Raleigh just to sit with me for a weekend. I had not known, before Patricia died, how many people were in my corner. Grief has a way of making you think you're alone in a room, even when the door is open. August returned, had coffee with me twice a week during those months. He was not a demonstrative man. He didn't say much, but he was there, and for a man in my situation, there is no more important thing than someone who simply stays. In September, my daughter pleaded guilty to financial elder abuse, document fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. Nolan pleaded to the same. The property transfer was voided. The power of attorney was invalidated. The house in Greenville, the house where my wife and I had lived for 22 years, where my children grew up, where I had expected to grow old, remained mine. The exhumation confirmed what the blood work had suggested. Patricia's death had been accelerated. The medical examiner's language was careful, the way that language always is. But its meaning was not ambiguous. I drive up to Asheville sometimes now, not to the cabin. That property sold in the divorce proceedings, and I have no interest in seeing it again. But I drive to a lookout about 15 miles further up the mountain, where you can see the ridge line running north, and I park, and I sit, and I talk to her. I know that sounds like something a man in a movie does. I don't particularly care. Patricia was 66 years old, and she was in perfect health, and she spent the last months of her life confused and frightened and believing she was losing her mind. She deserved better than that. She deserved to be angry. She deserved to know the truth. I carry that with me every day, and I expect I always will. But here's the other thing I carry. The thing I try to remember when the grief gets heaviest. I almost signed those papers. I almost drank that wine on the 4th night. I almost let it happen because I was too broken and too trusting to look at what was right in front of me. A man I had never properly met, standing at a fence line in the February cold, changed the course of everything. I've thought about that a great deal, about the specific randomness of it, that August Reardon happened to live next door, happened to notice Nolan's manner during a conversation about a property line, happened to be home that morning when I was standing at the kitchen window. None of it was inevitable. All of it could easily have gone the other way. My wife used to say that the people who save us are almost never the ones we expect. She said it about small things. A stranger who gives you an umbrella. A neighbor who shovels your walk. She didn't know she was describing something larger. I think about that a lot. I am 68 years old, and I live alone in a house that belongs to me, in a city where I know my neighbors, and I have my son's phone numbers memorized in the order I need to dial them. I take no supplements I did not purchase myself. I drink no wine that I did not open myself. I sign nothing without Dennis on the phone first. These are not the habits of a man who is at peace. but they are the habits of a man who is still here. And for now, that is enough. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the courtroom, not the test results, not even the conversation at the kitchen table where I laid everything out and watched my daughter's face change. I keep coming back to a February morning, standing at a fence line in the cold. A man I barely knew asking me a question I hadn't thought to ask myself. Do you normally forget things like that? That question saved my life. And the honest answer, the one I almost didn't give, saved everything else. I spent a lot of time since then thinking about what actually happened. Not the legal version, not the medical version, but the deeper version. The one that has to do with choices and consequences and the slow, quiet way the character reveals itself under pressure. Nolan and my daughter didn't become who they became overnight. That's the part people don't want to sit with. The greed didn't appear from nowhere the morning they filed those documents. It built up over years, small rationalizations, small shortcuts, small moments where they chose the easier thing instead of the right thing. And then one day, the easier thing was this. That's how it works. A person who would do what they did to Patricia, to me, did make one catastrophic decision. They made 100 small ones first. And I made some of my own. I signed a document without reading it because I was grieving, and I trusted someone I should have examined more carefully. I dismissed the fog in my head because I wanted an explanation that didn't require me to look at my own family. I almost let comfort and loyalty close my eyes to what was right in front of me. What pulled me out of it was not luck, though I used to call it that. It was paying attention when I finally made myself do it. It was asking a lawyer the question I'd been avoiding. It was having the clarity in one cold conversation at a fence line to actually hear what August was telling me and then act on it instead of explaining it away. My wife used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing a necessary thing while the fear is still running. I thought I understood that when she said it. I understand it differently now. Courage, in my experience, is also just sitting down at a kitchen table with the truth and not getting up until the other person has heard it. It doesn't look heroic. It looks like two people in a quiet kitchen, and one of them refusing to pretend anymore. August had that kind of courage first. He didn't know me. He had no obligation to walk to that fence line and say what he said. He did it anyway because it was the right thing to do, and he was the kind of man who does the right thing to do, and he was the kind of man who does the right thing even when it costs him something. I want to be that kind of man. I'm not always sure I am, but I'm trying. What I know is this. The truth has a direction. It moves toward the surface eventually, regardless of how deep you bury it. Patricia's blood work was anomalous, and a doctor noticed and wrote it down. A capsule in a cabinet had the wrong color. A retired DEA agent had 32 years of knowing when something was off. The truth was already moving. I just had to stop walking away from it. I'm 68 years old, and I live alone, and I check what I sign, and I trust carefully. That's not bitterness. That's just what I learned and what I carry and what I try to pass on to anyone who will listen.